Hey, how's it going, everyone? Just gonna do a video on theology and interpreting the Bible and the different stance that people take. And really, to me, there are three other camps that I see. I consider myself a Bible literalist. There are not many of us out there, and so I take the Bible literally unless it's telling something that is very, very obvious that it's not literal. And if it's interpreted that way, it could hurt somebody or injure somebody or something like that. I can't think of a case off the top of my head, but it's that kind of mindset. Like it's literal, unless it's just like describing a beast coming out of the sea or something like that. It's very, very clearly symbolic and, that type of thing. And so that influences the way that I read the entire Bible. And so I want to contrast that with three other groups that are out there. One are the Hebrew Israelites. And not a person. When I mention these kind of groups, again, I'm not talking about individuals, who may subscribe to this. I'm talking about their leadership, the groups that we see, in prominence and, teaching, and then, as I'll explain, falsely teaching. So one group will be the Hebrew Israelites. And then another group are the baller Sunday Christians. They would be the non-literalists. And so, that's the second group, and then a group called a preterist, who believe that the fulfillment of the Bible has already happened in human history. And so, these are the three other groups out there that I would say the main competitions to, the things that I teach on my channel. And so, I'll just walk through 4 different passages and then explain, how differently they will read these verses. And then, to me, once a person does that, it's going to lead them down, very, very strange paths in terms of interpreting the Bible. And, in these verses, for example, we have absolutely no reason to believe that they're not, not literal. And so, I don't know how a person can take that stance, but, these are very, very important, I would say, in the times that we live in as well, because they're related to the end times. And, I'm going to talk about 2 of them related to the 2 witnesses. One of them is reincarnation, and then the 4th one is the virgin birth. And so I just want to encourage people, first of all, to look at the Bible, know that there are these other 3 groups, options out there. And I would take the stance to be a Bible literalist. It's a very, very good place to be, not just with the mark of the beast, which to me is just, blatantly obvious that's hopefully people will acknowledge is very likely, that will occur in the very least. If not, virtual certainty, that it will not just happen, but happen relatively soon. But not just with that, which I would say is actually a bit less controversial in these days. But, that time period to understand more about how that's going to actually get fulfilled and forced worldwide, a person would need to understand, other aspects of the Bible. And, these passages help in piecing that together, that kind of thing. And so the first passage I want to read is Acts 1:10-11, and this is an amazing encounter that the disciples are experiencing here. And so Acts 1:10-11 reads, "And while they were gazing into heaven as he went," referring to Jesus, "behold, 2 men stood by them in white robes, and said, 'Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven.'" And so this is prophetic. These 2 men are giving the disciples the scene for Christ's second coming. And so he will return from heaven, and then there will be 2 men standing there. So this is very, very important in order to interpret the book of Revelation, which is the next verse that I'm about to read from Revelation 11. And so a person who's a Hebrew Israelite, or at least the groups that I've talked to, I haven't seen actually a single Hebrew Israelite group who believes that this is literal, and so that's telling. All the major groups, GMS, End Times Teacher I talked to, Teachers for Truth, even Yasher Allah Milwaukee, I'm assuming they all take the same stance that they're not actually 2 people, that will be standing there when Christ returns, from heaven, like it says here. And so I have no reason to not believe that that's the case, that it's literally 2 men will be standing there, and then we get further insight into who those 2 men actually are in Revelation 11. And so I read that literally, and so I don't know why a person wouldn't. And so, the Hebrew Israelites will say that it's two nations of people, the northern and southern kingdom. So they'll say it's like symbolic of a group of people, I guess, or something like that. The everyday baller Sunday Christian, a lot of them don't actually believe that, Christ died and like it makes a difference. And so they're not going to be concerned about the reciprocal event where he returns. I use ballers because most of them are, they will largely, not care. If you bring this kind of passage up, they'll be like, whatever, it doesn't matter. To me, a preterist will believe that this second coming has occurred already, at some point in history, and then after this event, I guess. And so they will just say that this has already happened. I don't know how a person can take that stance, but a non-literalist, I would say the average kind of typical baller Sunday Christian, they may actually, kind of say that, yeah, it's literal when, that this will happen, but they won't acknowledge the interpretation of the next passage I'm about to read about the timing, and the timeline for these two witnesses being here. And so, I would just say for people out there, there's no reason to not take this passage literally. And if a person does take this passage literally, it has a lot of implications, on interpretation of other passages. And so, again, these are two, presumably angels that are telling them this. So it's like coming right from the Most High, it's like, it's not, I'm not trying to disrespect Paul or the disciples and stuff, but this is directly from God, that these two men in white robes that are, giving this, this piece of information, an important piece of information. And so it's from a very, very trustworthy source. And so, we can take it literally, and I would highly recommend people to do that. And so that's the first one. The second one that I'll read is Revelation 11:3. And this one is, again, related to the two witnesses. And I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Again, the Hebrew Israelites will believe that those two witnesses are what they're doing on the streets. And a lot of them are actually ball earthers as well. So I know for a fact that that's not correct. Like, I'm not saying everything that they teach is completely wrong or anything like that, but there's zero chance that that's true if the Bible is actually true. And so I dismiss that very easily. And so that I hope is very, very clear, that God would never use two nations, whatever nation those people think that they are, and, have them be ball earthers, and something even more sinister that I'm going to talk about is the virgin birth. But so again, I see absolutely no reason to not believe that everything that I just read in Revelation 11:3, curious, it's 11:3, 11 times 3 is 33, living in this time, this time of Freemasonry. And I will grant authority to my two witnesses. So again, we have consistency with Revelation 11:3 and Acts 1 that I just read. So there's two witnesses. They will prophesy for 1,260 days. Again, I have no reason why would God pick 1,260 if it's not exactly 1,260. Why not just say, for a short time, a long time, medium length time, or whatever. It's very precise. And so, and he also goes to another level of saying that they'll be clothed in sackcloth, which is actually terminology that's used to describe the way the prophets were dressed in the Old Testament. And so that's very, very important to know, in particular Elijah. And so if you just look at different passages where Elijah was prophesying in the Old Testament, he was, dressed in sackcloth. And so there are clues, to help us understand that that those two prophets will be John the Baptist, who is Elijah, and I'll talk about that in the next passage, and then Moses. And so, again, I have no reason, I don't know how a person could read Revelation 11:3 and not just take it for what it is. And so it's very, very important as well to note that the beginning of it starts with grant authority. And so just looking around, me included, no one is able to have this type of authority that a person, if they read the rest of Revelation 11, no normal, quote, person could handle that. Not myself, for sure. No one. And I'm not being rude to anybody, people who follow this channel. No one is even close that I know. No one. And so it's not anybody in the quote mainstream. It's not the Hebrews. It's not Joel Osteen or TD Jakes or any of these dummies. It's hopefully that's obvious to people. If you see the power that they're granted, it's exactly the same power that was granted to Elijah and Moses in the Old Testament. Exactly the same. Blood to water, granting authority over the weather, the rain, and all that. So these are not, it's not riffraff. You know, hopefully that's very, very obvious to people that God writes these things very, very carefully. I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses. If you see, they'll have power over everything. They'll have power to give people plagues. They'll have power over the weather, over the water, whatever they want. No one can touch them, you know, during this 1260 days. And so they're very precious, you know, very special. And so, and they would have to be groomed really to be able to handle this, you know, because this is the end times, you know. And so people, like it says in Revelation 11, people are going to hate them for what they're doing, and they'll end up killing them at the end of this 1260 days because they're tormenting the entire earth. And so, again, no reason to not take that literally. If a person believes that their 2 nations are symbolic or something like that, that goes against Acts. And then so you can't take that verse literally either. And so just the whole thing just falls apart, you know, very, very quickly. And so I would highly recommend a person to not do that. And really the everyday sort of baller Sunday Christian, they're not really actually looking towards the end times. You know, they don't really care actually about the specifics of any of this kind of stuff. A lot of them would just, like, again, not care. They're not necessarily evil, but a lot of the actual shills and stuff, like, they're going to teach something completely different, you know, and they're not going to acknowledge that if you read the rest of Revelation 11 and Revelation 17 and 18, that these 2 witnesses will be in America. They have to be, you know, it's just obvious by the language that's used. And so now America's, you know, lifespan, its future needs to be assessed through the lens of Revelation 11:3. That it would need a period of 1260 days where these 2 prophets can prophesy in the land of America, which I believe is Mystery Babylon. And so it has to stand. And so that's why I believe we're living in those kind of days where these things are going to literally come true. You know, that this exchange that I read in Acts 1:10-11 is going to happen. It has to, because that once that happens, then the 2 witnesses are here. God's elect are taken away, the quote, my people in Revelation 18:4, people worldwide. And then the 2 witnesses are quote, replaced by those people who left. It's like a transaction. And so Christ returns with his angels, takes away my people, and then 2 witnesses will be there. And so, and then the clock starts ticking on this 1260 days. And so, and then if you read into this, into Revelation 11, it says that they're going to be administering plagues, and then Revelation 16 actually lists the plagues. You know, I believe in sequential order. And so, you know, they're not blowing kisses to people. And so if America's in a tough condition right now, it's only going to get worse. And so that's why these people can't say that America's Mystery Babylon, because it puts us in the end times. You know, it puts these words coming true literally right at our doorstep. And so don't fall for these baller Sunday Christians saying the Antichrist will pop up and, you know, it's going to happen in Israel and all that stuff. That's complete nonsense. There's literally zero support for that. There's a tiny bit of language in Daniel, but I've debunked that many, many times. And it's just, it's not anything that is relevant to the end times. You know, those are historical things that were happening that refer to that kind of figure. And then, you know, the temple sacrifice being removed is the elect being taken away. You know, it's coded language, and God did that on purpose for people to go use that, thinking that it's going to be the temple in the Middle East or something, which no one even knows that it exists or cares about. You know, the world is so numb. They don't care about what's going on, even like in their own city, much less Israel and all that kind of stuff. So it's very, very obvious that the entire book of Revelation, the beginning of it, focuses in America. And then the focus shifts to the Middle East for the Battle of Armageddon. And so don't be deceived by these baller Sunday Christians, these quote non-literalists. They don't have a clue what's going on. And so, again, this is all on the premise that the Bible is true, that, you know, that Christ will return, you know, because Christ existed. And then so if he was taken up, we are told in Acts that he will return in the same way. And then the clock is ticking on this 1260 days. And so I have no reason to not take any of this literally. They'll have authority, 2 witnesses. They'll prophesy for 1260 days. The Bible says they'll have help of angels. This is when the gospel is going to be preached to the entire world during this 3.5-year period. And they'll be clothed in sackcloth, so they'll be poor. And so I don't know how somebody would put that much information in one single sentence and have it be like just very, very symbolic, when nothing about that statement sounds symbolic. You know, like a beast rising out of the sea. Okay, that's a little, you know, it's not going to literally happen. And so that's totally different language that's used in Revelation. Revelation 11 to me is actually the most important, but the most clear, crisp language, precise language about what exactly is going to happen in the end times and for what time period, you know. And so I would just say for people, you know, take comfort in that. Being a Bible literalist, even if other people aren't, who cares? Because that's a horrible position to take when Revelation 11 for sure, and then Revelation 13, the mark of the beast chapter, and Revelation 16 and 17 and 18 are all crystal clear. Revelation 17 and 18 could not describe America better. Revelation 13, to me, with the mark of the beast, is as clear as humanly possible. We got Jeff Berwick, the dollar vigilante, Satan himself, reading it. So, I mean, they, like non-Christian people are just reading it like freely. So that could not possibly be any clearer that that's happening literally right before our eyes. So 11, you know, 16, sorry, 11, 13, 16, 17 and 18 could not be clearer. And then 19 and 20 requires a little bit of depth, but that's not even when God's right-hand side is on earth. So it matters for people who want the full story, the ending. And then 21 and 22 is largely the kingdom of heaven. And so me personally, the book of Revelation is crystal clear. You know, once a person understands that these are literal two witnesses for a literal 1,260 days, literally standing in America, clothed in sackcloth. So that's important. And then again, I guess the preterists would say that these have already happened, which is crazy, because if you read the plagues that are written in 16, there's no account of those plagues ever happening. Like mark of the beast would have had to have already been fulfilled. People getting sores who have the mark of the beast, water being turned into blood again, you know, not just in the, you know, the story in Exodus with Moses. It would have to have happened again. And so, I mean, like preterists literally have absolutely no stance, literally no solid ground at all. And so I'm not sure what's worse, a preterist or a baller Sunday Christian. Really, they're equally the same, because they just don't care. You know, they just will not even read these and take any kind of position on them. And so, you know, people can decide who's worse, but to me, that's a ridiculous stance to have in lieu of all the things going on in the world. The next one is Matthew 11, 11 to 14. Truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist. This, again, I don't think people quite get it. Christ is always humble. You know, he's just, it's his very nature. He's not saying stuff to just act humble. People are like, well, doesn't that include Jesus because he was born of women? Christ is humble. Like, he doesn't say, oh, next to me, and then this guy, you know, even though his left and his right-hand side is very clearly Moses and Elijah, and who's John the Baptist in this verse. And so he doesn't put himself first. He even has the incredible humility to say people will do even greater things than him. And he's done, no one can do the kind of things that he's done. So he's just humble. Like, I just want people to really understand that. He's not faking it. So anyway, he's giving John the Baptist credit here to be among those born of women, there has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist, yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Why is that? Well, in the very least, they'll know more, you know, because John the Baptist, even in this interaction, people will see that he didn't know that he was Elijah, you know, like God doesn't allow him to know all the stuff that he's done, you know, in the past. And so it would overwhelm him, and he had to be focused on ushering in, you know, Christ's ministry. And so people in the kingdom, whoever those people are, they're going to know stuff, obviously, you know, in the spirit world. Just by definition, that's going to give certain insight, just knowing that a spirit world existed, but then also what's going on in the kingdom. So that's what he means, you know, in the very least, when he says, yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. He means in the physical, not that like John the Baptist is going to be demoted, you know, in the kingdom of heaven or anything. Him and Moses are, to me, the two highest exalted spirits. And then it's the 24 elders, the 144,000, and then the mixed multitude. Verse 12, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. And so a Bible literalist would be standing next to Jesus and be like, okay, Jesus said that person right there is Elijah, even though he's pointing at John the Baptist. And he said, if you're willing to accept it. And so I was like, I'll accept it. And so Sunday Christian Bible baller, non-literalists would start making up stories. You know, it's like, oh no, that can't be Elijah, because that's actually John the Baptist. And so Jesus must have made a mistake, or, must not be thinking clearly, or whatever. He must be kidding, or who cares, is probably what most people will say. And so that's evil, and so I would just avoid people like that. And so that's just nonsense. We have no reason to not believe. And he also prefaces it with, and if you're willing to accept it, because he knows that he's about to make a statement that very few people will accept. When he's pointing at John the Baptist, he's pointing at Elijah. So what does that mean? They obviously have different bodies, because Elijah was back in the day, the 2 Kings. So they must have the same spirit. So, well, what does that mean then? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that Elijah's spirit was reincarnated into John the Baptist's body. And if you can accept this, that Revelation 11:3 and in Acts, one of those two witnesses is also John the Baptist, who's Elijah. And so in the very least, he served 3 roles, incredibly important roles throughout the whole Bible. And so not shocking that when the disciples are asking and debating amongst each other, can I be on your left-hand, right-hand side when you return into glory? He said those places have already been set, by the Father. And so we know who they are. Because like I read in Acts, when Christ returns, he's going to return and 2 men are going to replace his elect, and my people. And so those are the 2 people, that will be on his left and right-hand side. And they'll be here administering plagues. And then like I read earlier in Revelation 11:3, they're going to have the authority. So don't be like these Christians. A lot of these Christians are just completely brain dead, and they don't actually care what Jesus says. Like for me and people who are Bible literalists, which again is a fantastic place to be, because the Bible is literally coming true. So why not take other parts of it literally, not just the mark of the beast? Jesus, if anybody else pointed to somebody and said that person is that, we wouldn't start a debate. Like, hey, I know that person, that person's name is John. We wouldn't be like, we'll explain how do you know that, start questioning them. Well, why do you think his name's John? All that kind of stuff. Like Jesus knows John the Baptist, like for many, many verses intimately. And like it says here, he's the greatest amongst men. And so he's not confused. He knows who that spirit is because he assigned that spirit to that body. And so, again, a lot of these Sunday Christians, a lot of them are ballers. Worse, they're just stupid. They just don't know how to read. And they don't make obvious connections. And they're not allowed to, really is what the issue is here. Moreover, not so much just like making fun of them that they're stupid. Really what's going on is they're not allowed to think like this, and so put these pieces together. And so, because once a person does, it puts us in a position where we know that God is near, very, very near. And so don't be like those people. So Elijah and John the Baptist are the same, that's the same energy, spirit, however you want to just call it, soul, in them. And in both of those bodies, and then it'll be the same one in one of those 2 witnesses. And so clothed in sackcloth, given authority to prophesy for 1,260 days, literally. And so reincarnation is a biblical fact, and so that doesn't mean it applies to everybody. We have to be humble. The Hebrew Israelites will start making all these things, like Tahar is Paul, and they'll start extrapolating all this out to a bunch of nonsense, speculation and all that kind of stuff. They're all ball earthers. And so like, why would God reinfuse the most precious spirits, that collection of spirits that he's had in the past, into people who are ball earthers, like basically make them dumber in the last days, when we should have much better vantage point of like the human history and like what's about to come. These people at this time didn't have any idea what the mark of the beast was, or, technology, microchips and all that kind of stuff. They're back now for sure. And so that's what the Hebrews will do with this kind of truth. And I would highly recommend, there's no reason to do that unless there's a biblical foundation for not speculating, but like interpreting. And so it's not speculation to believe. And I would say, no, I know that those 2 witnesses are John the Baptist, who's Elijah, and Moses. And so that's not speculation. That's very rooted. There's many, many examples, verses that I could use to support that. Many, many. In other Matthew, in the minor prophets, in Revelation itself, by what they're entrusted to do. And John the Baptist and Moses, these spirits travel kind of in groups, and so we see that, in other parts of the Bible. And so that's not speculation, but speculating that, oh, this person is this, that's the Apostle Paul and the reincarnation, that's complete nonsense. That's why we know those people are just completely lost and out of their mind. And so Hebrew Israelites are completely lost, so we don't need to trust them really on anything else. And then the average everyday baller Sunday Christian, you say reincarnation, will get freaked out. But that means that they hate God, you know, because Christ said it from his own mouth. And so they just are, their mind is blocked, you know, from spiritual things. They're only allowed to listen to like what is on CNN and Fox News and all that kind of stuff. So, and then the Bible says in Revelation 1:7, those who pierced him will see him. And so even those who physically crucified Christ, they'll be back now, you know, in the time that we live in. And so reincarnation happens on God's left and right hand side. And so that's what God does, you know. And so like Jesus says here, and if you are willing to accept it, it's not for very many people. And if people don't get it, who cares? You know, and in the stage that we're in now, they're not going to get it ever. And that's fine. The last one is the virgin birth, which is very, very important. Matthew 1:24-25. When Joseph woke up from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son. And he called his name Jesus, the way he was instructed. So the Hebrew Israelites will say, but knew her not again until she had given birth to a son. Because a lot of them are non-virgin birthers. They believe Joseph and Mary laid together to produce Christ, which that's a non-literal interpretation. When I read that, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, I read that literally. That literally Joseph did not know Mary until, you know, Christ was born. So never, you know, not once. And so again, I don't understand why people have a difficulty with this. I mean, I do understand. I'm saying this rhetorically. God has given all these groups, the leaders, especially these alphabet soup groups, just satanic doctrine, you know, and that's why they don't have an understanding on anything else, you know. And so hopefully that's kind of obvious to people. I think a majority of Christians, I'm not sure, I believe they actually are virgin birthers, which is good. The everyday baller Sunday Christian, non-literalist. I believe most of them would actually be virgin birthers, because it's important, because, you know, the Holy Spirit was the one who infused Christ's spirit into Mary's womb. And so the Bible says that blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is an unforgivable sin. So I don't know why people even, take a risk, you know, with this theology and, you know, take the stance of the non-virgin birth. And so, you know, again, for me, it's just obvious that those people are actors. And so God is just setting up with nonsense theology, and then the absolute tattoo and badge that they're wearing. This is the most obvious one, actually. The ball earth one, a lot of people don't get into the debate, and so they don't even know that this kind of a debate exists. But, you know, the non-virgin birth to me is actually the most sinister if there's a ranking. And so we definitely don't need to listen to people who take that stance, because that's absolutely insane. And, you know, so again, these four passages, really to me, for a person who is a virgin birther, a flat earther, and then a person who understands America's Mystery Babylon, it's very clear at that point that these words in Revelation 11:3 and in Acts 1 are right at our doorstep, because you know, we need 1,260 days for America to still stand to receive these blows, really, that, you know, these two witnesses are going to administering, not just America, but the whole world, and then still be livable, you know. And so I want people to understand the end times is not God making the world unlivable for all people, or else it wouldn't last the number of days that it's required to last if a person takes the stance of 1,260 days. And I don't know how a person could not take that stance, because it doesn't even use like times, and half a time, which it sometimes does for 3.5 years. It explicitly writes 1,260 days. And so that's why this exchange, quote exchange, of God's elect or my people with the two witnesses, I believe, I mean, it has to happen soon, you know, definitely this year. And so, you know, I think that for people who are Bible literalists and, you know, look at these four passages, just these four alone, to me, you know, if a person can receive the flat earth, the virgin birth, and, you know, understand reincarnation because it's required, or else the two witnesses, a person will not be able to understand that they're spirits that have existed already. And then they have certain characteristics, and God has done that freely, you know, on his left and right hand side, you know, infused spirits in different bodies, in different generations. And so people would read that and just get confused. And so for anybody who has common sense and is a Bible literalist, especially when Jesus says, there's really no reason to not take anything Jesus says literally, it puts us in a very, very good position awaiting his return. Hope everyone's doing well. Bye.